The declaration has arrived.
Welcome the Silver Grays, the Green Mountain Boys. Now, patriots and citizens, the Moodus Fife Drum Band will play the national anthem.
Good afternoon. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them for separation. We hold these truths to be self-evidence that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of people to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should be not changed for light and transcendent causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuse and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to grow off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their form of sister of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries, usurpations. All have the direct object, the establishment of the absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
Ken Millman,
Ed Chase.
descendants of Stephen Carpenter. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good.
He has forbidden the governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only.
He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands.
He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers.
He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislature. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murder which they would commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the form of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection in waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hand.
I'm Barry Emery portraying Thomas Jefferson and will read the last part of the Declaration. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which we may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, and friends. We therefore, representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from the allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all the other acts and things that independent states may have the right to do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance of the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Shoulder your firelocks. Take care. To the front, 2 steps, march. Halt. Company, to the right, about face. First section. Find a low position. Handle cartridges. Prime pans. Cast about, charge with musket. Boys, when ready. Make ready. Full cock muskets, hammerstalls off. Freeze in. Fire. Shoulder firelocks. To the right, about face. Second section. To the right, about. To the right, about face. Forward. Ready. 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 Hold. Yes, firelocks. Company, take care. Shoulder your firelocks. I'm about to dismiss the company. And when we do, it is tradition to say something pithy, like, for the Congress, or huzzah. Company, prepare to be dismissed. Boys, firelocks. To the right about face, dismiss.
Okay. Freedom.
Huzzah.
Yeah, yeah.
Your attention, please. Oyez, oyez. We have Mr. Tim Abbott, who will explain to you, lecture to you on the wonders of the Declaration of Independence. Be attentive and enjoy.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for indulging me while you're enjoying your meal and the fruits of our liberty on this typical Berkshire day in the summer. It's great to be here in East Hoosick, which it was back then. They didn't name it after Adams until shortly after that. So Adams and North Adams were known as East Hoosick, and Berkshire County was barely 15 or 16 years old. Had split off from Hampshire County in the early 1760s. And we're here at this time because news of our independency has not only reached the province, now Gulp State, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but we're actually getting printed copies of it, distributed across to every town. Printed, in fact, in Salem, July 17th, 1776. And if you happen to be in Pittsfield at the end of July and you go to the opening of the Berkshire Museum's 250th exhibit, you will see a surviving broadside that was printed on that date and given to Pittsfield. They still have it, which is astonishing. So it took a couple of weeks for the news of what happened in Philadelphia to make its way throughout the northern, or as they would have called it, the eastern colonies. And in fact, the Massachusetts Spy, wonderful newspaper name, on July 10th, printed, "It is reported that the Honorable Continental Congress have declared the American colonies independent of the monster of imperious domination and cruelty, Great Britain, which we hope is true." And later, they started printing stories about how the Declaration was read in the various towns. Worcester claims that they did it as early as the 14th of July. There are some questions about how that could be, but it's possible because the first New England printing of it happened in Providence, Rhode Island, and from that it's just a little bit up the Blackstone River to Worcester, so we'll give that to them. Fort Ticonderoga did not receive the news and read it to the troops until the 25th of July. And this is significant because it changed absolutely everything about a war that had already been going on for more than a year. Our independence was not the initial aim of the outbreak of hostilities, though some people wished for it. Our independence, in fact, was a radical departure from everyone's prior experience as subjects of George III and part of the Empire of Great Britain. That's what they were used to. Used, indeed, to being, in some cases, 5 generations removed from the mother country and used to handling their own local affairs as they saw fit, but still very British in outlook, at least up here. Those 13 colonies, however, were anything but united. Somebody from Massachusetts looked very much askance at someone from the South, by which I mean Philadelphia, let alone whatever's going on down in Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia that's peopled by convicts. And the people in the South had the same thoughts about Easterners. Anything but united. There'd only been 2 sessions of Congress. The Continental Congress was a brandy new idea, and it came out of the decade that led up to our armed resistance to British authority. They were not used to corresponding very much with each other outside their regions. Yes, along the coast, there was trade and there were people who had business relationships, but somebody living in East Hoosick has moved here from either what we now call the Pioneer Valley or from Connecticut or from eastern Massachusetts in the last 10 or 15 years. They've never been to Philadelphia. They've never met someone from Maryland. They've got different goals and aspirations here. So what's going to make us all hang together, or we shall hang separately, as Ben Franklin discussed? It was a radical departure. And it happened at a time when the war was not going well at all. Men from here were enlisted for a year and shoved north by companies in the spring of 1776. Men from Berkshire County, men from western Massachusetts, who were thrown into a situation where smallpox was ravaging their forces, and your only real way of getting resistance to that was inoculation, cutting your body and putting pustules from an infected person in the wound and hoping to get the disease in a lighter form. But you're still contagious. It's still about 3% mortality at that rate. And the army starts retreating, and they're not quarantining these people. It's a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster, and by June of 1776, that army is in utter disarray and actually falls back in early July, leaves Canada completely, and for a moment rests at Crown Point, an old exploded fort on Lake Champlain, and decides that they're going to hold the line at Ticonderoga 15 miles to the south. They don't even know the declaration has been signed when they make that decision. At the same time, the army that evacuated Boston, much to our delight, spent very little time in Halifax before an enormous invading fleet arrived off New York. 32,000 soldiers and sailors. The largest seaborne invasion launched in the 18th century, and it's launched there. And how do you defend Manhattan? You cannot ring it with forts. It's got rivers on 2 sides. Long Island is huge. Staten Island is largely loyalist in its orientation. It's a deep water port. It's gonna be taken, and Washington's trying to make a stand there. as we're losing the North, we're going to fight a losing fight to keep New York also. And not only are these British troops in those ships, but there are hired German troops there too, the ones we know of as Hessians, purchased from their princes to reinforce Britain's army. One of the grievances that Jefferson outlines in the Declaration is that he has brought foreign mercenaries against us. Another grievance is that he has engaged the, using not appropriate words here, savages from the frontier to ravish our towns. There is a dual specter of alien enemy attack in some of those grievances, because we live in a borderlands here. To the north are the Hampshire grants, which you know of as Vermont, disputed between New Hampshire's grants given to largely Connecticut men, people with last names like Allen and Warner, Green Mountain Boys so-called, and the province of New York, which has claimed it all along. These lands are still indigenous lands. The Stockbridge Mohicans have been systematically dispossessed of their holdings in Berkshire County over the previous 30 years and concentrated in Stockbridge, and they're fighting on our side. Almost 100 men from their tribe serve with the Continental Forces during this war, and the thanks they get for that is at the end of the conflict, they are given an ox to roast, and they lose their lands within 6 months. And that hardened attitudes. And so something happens in Philadelphia at the same time that we are losing ground and have no expectation that we'll be able to hold on for another year. And it happens over the course of a couple of months. And Jefferson is given the task to put down in writing the justification for a complete rupture with the mother country. This is not something they did at the beginning. And they could have said, we're done with it, we're going to be free. This is something they did at a dark moment. And it is something that is the foundation of everything that came after that. That right, not always lived up to self-determination, embodied in those words, that's what we are the stewards of today. And to try to live up to it. Nobody knew how it was going to end. And so when those words are printed and shared throughout the Commonwealth, and most people are illiterate, so they're going to learn it when somebody who's got some eyeglasses and some learning reads it to them, probably in one of the 2 or 3 places that serve as the civic hearts of their communities, either at the meeting house or at the tavern, or if they have erected a liberty pole, as Worcester did, as my town of Canaan, Connecticut did, that's where they read it. Because they had extra legal government at this point. They had established committees of correspondence and committees of inspection and committees for sniffing out enemies. They had all of that as a parallel to what they were rejecting, which was crown authority imposed over them. And now they are describing themselves as a free and independent country comprised of 13 states, not provinces. And the rest of 1776 goes very badly until the very end. So they have this, and they have definitely pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honors. And those with no property, and those who are at the bottom rungs of society are in this too. And they're becoming the long-serving soldiers, and they're becoming the families that have to sustain the army with whatever crops they can grow without the labor of their sons and their uncles and their fathers. And for people who did not see a future for themselves in that, and there were plenty, enslaved people, Anglicans for whom the king is the head of their church, people who felt that absolute independence was a step too far, their neighbors are hunting them now
Their lives and their properties are at risk. Some of them are taking up arms. If you happen to be a pacifist, if you are a Quaker, this is a terrible time because fence striding is not going to be accepted. And you're viewed with great suspicion. So we could have easily pulled apart. We could have pulled apart at multiple times. And it's an 8-year war. And almost 7 of those years is fought with this vision. Not that the king would recognize our colonial rights and back off, but that we would determine our course ourselves. And yes, there are some bright, shining military moments at the end of 1776. There's the famous reversal of the Continental Army's fortunes at the darkest possible hour, crossing the Delaware, defeating the Hessians at Trenton, defending Trenton in the second battle, and then sneaking around and defeating 3 British regiments at Princeton, and then escaping into the mountains of the Watchung Range in New Jersey, and enduring defeat after defeat. Because what happens after that is it's no longer going to be a war fought by casual soldiers, militiamen like I'm representing to you today, short-term, volunteer, patriotically driven local defense forces. It's going to be a standing army, the very thing that they did not trust. Because what does a standing army do? It can be an instrument of authoritarian power. It can decide it wants power for itself. Some of the founding generation, the thinkers and the actors and the higher echelons within our colonies, the fathers so-called, they've read Locke, they've read Hobbes. They're going to read Gibbon and learn about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire in a way they hadn't before. And they know what happened when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. They don't trust standing armies, but they need one. And who's going to sign up for 3 years or the duration of the war? The poor, the newly arrived immigrant, the 5th son who will inherit nothing, the indentured servant, the person of color, the freed, and the enslaved. That's the Continental Army's core source of manpower from 1777 until the end. The officers, a little different, and their aims are different. There are not battles fought in Berkshire County during this time, but there is not a single household that is unaffected by what was put in words in the Declaration and what people were trying to commit to without any guarantee of success. And that's what I want to leave you with. They did not know, and they kept going. And they kept going even when some of them reached their limit. People did switch sides, not just Benedict Arnold. Some people deserted and went home. The words patriot meant something different then, and nobody knows what post-traumatic stress disorder was in this century, right? So let's judge them by their own lights as we look at who we claim today as a patriot in our family tree. It's important to know why people were loyalists. It's important to know why people might decide that their best chance of survival was to switch sides at various times. The fact that 80,000 loyalists left in 1783 is a chilling number. But it is a small percentage of those, maybe a third of the total population, who were not in agreement of armed resistance, but who stayed. From that point on, it's only 4 more years before it's clear that the Articles of Confederation are not holding us together, and we have the other remarkable founding document, our Constitution, that gives structure and purpose to the country we fought for. And they sometimes contradict each other. There's no right of rebellion in the Constitution. In fact, Shays' rebellion, which indeed affected Berkshire County, was a cautionary tale for those who met in Philadelphia in 1787 saying, we probably need the ability to cross state lines after fugitives and things like that. So they don't always talk to each other well, but they are the bookends of what we have inherited. And in each case, they're aspirational. The words of the Declaration ring with us. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of, initially, property. Crossed out by Franklin and substitute happiness. Happiness in the 18th century sense of the word meaning good fortune. Lives, fortunes, sacred honor, these were very important to the people of that time, no matter what their standing was. I think that's important. It was a community and communal effort, sometimes enforced by violence, sometimes intolerant of dissent. There are dark sides in every story and in every human life. But it was also the greatest hope for something other than life under monarchy, for something that at various times during the 250 years since those words were written, we have had moments of great inspiration and taken huge steps forward for the benefit of many, many people. And we've also had moments where we've stepped backwards. Those cycles happen. It's why returning to the founding words and thinking about them and what they mean to each of us and what they charge us to do, not just for ourselves, but for the benefit of others, is probably the most important message of that period of history and their sacrifice that I'll leave you with today. Thank you.
Modern narratives of copaceticness, of peacefulness, where you read these, from writings of missionaries, from politicians.
What I have up here are some ingredients that I will go through, but I want to show a document that we have that's dated June 15th, 1775. And this was a resolution passed by the Massachusetts Provincial Congress in Watertown, because they got kicked out of Boston. They were in Watertown, and they had a Massachusetts Army stationed at Dorchester Heights and in Cambridge, all along the outskirts of the Shawmut Peninsula, because the British were occupying the town. And so the Provincial Congress, knowing that all these militiamen were now camped out, they wanted to provide nutrition. And this is what they resolved: that each soldier in the Massachusetts Army shall have the following per day: 1 pound of bread, and if bread was not available, oftentimes you would find something like this, which was called biscuit. During the American Civil War, they started calling this hardtack, which is just hard food. But these were biscuits. So 1 pound of bread or biscuit or flour, if times were even more lean. 1/2 pound of beef or 1/2 pound of pork, and if pork cannot be had, 1 pound and 1/4 of beef. And 1 in 7 shall have 1 pound and 1/4 of salt fish, a very important commodity here in New England. Article 3, 1 pint of milk, and if milk cannot be had, 1 gill of rice. And a gill is about 2 tablespoons. It's a unit of measure that we don't use anymore, but it's about 2 tablespoons, so rice was being issued. It's a dried good. 1 quart of good spruce or malt beer. Now, spruce beer, this is a bottle you can come up after and smell. It smells like pine sol. But spruce would have been used to bitter the beer in the absence of hops, which grow wild but could not be had in large quantities because of war restrictions. So beer was being rationed to the soldiers. 1 gill of peas. We have some peas here. English peas are always on the Englishman's menu. And also 1 gill of beans, or a sauce equivalent. And when they say sauce, they mean just the sauce to the meat. Beans were a sauce. Rice were a sauce. Anything on the side, carrots, that was a sauce to the meat. Not necessarily a gravy, but something that went with the food. And then 6 ounces of good butter per week. Article 7 has 1 pound of good common soap,
So keep clean. This was something that General Washington found that the Massachusetts militiamen had a hard time doing, keeping clean. So issuing them some soap to keep clean. You know, those guys from Marblehead, you got to watch out for those guys. Anyway, 1 pound of good common soap per week and half a pint of vinegar per man per week. Now vinegar seems strange, but it's lumped in there with soap. So it may have been used for cleaning, but also there was a drink at the time that you may have heard of. Anybody heard of Switchel? Anybody ever have Switchel before? 18th century Gatorade. Basically, it's vinegar mixed with a sweetener, sometimes molasses, sometimes maple syrup, a little bit of spice, and they would drink it like a lemonade. And this is why they were given vinegar, to wash and to perhaps use for drinking. So this was the ideal. This was at the beginning of the conflict. The Declaration of Independence is over a year away in Philadelphia. And so this is the ideal ration for these men of the Massachusetts Army. Now, as we get further into the war and things get more and more lean, specifically once we get to places like Valley Forge where they're actually on starvation rations, it became a lot more difficult, and they were giving the men what they could. But early in the war, you could see a lot of these things in the ration orders, plus a bunch of other things. Now, the Massachusetts Army had these rationed along with codfish, salt pork, and beef. But the troops, some of the troops, the militia troops down in Rhode Island, were issued chocolate. Now, chocolate, as many of you know, is a calorie-dense, not nutritional product. It gives them a lot of nutrition, and you can easily put it in a bag. And this here is my knapsack. This is what a lot of towns were issuing to militias early in the war. And food in the 18th century, despite what a lot of people may tell you, wasn't just soups and stews. Now, soups and stews were very popular because there was always a fire going, so you could have a rolling kettle boiling a pudding or a piece of meat or something like that. But they were also interested in spices. And we can tell from the Boston newspapers that they were getting spices from all over the world at this point. Because despite the grievances that we had with Great Britain, we were still part of the largest global trading network that had ever existed up until that point. So we could get things that were coming from other English ports, say in India, and other holdings in the Caribbean and things like that. So Boston became this place where you could get lemons, you could get nutmeg, cinnamon, chocolate, coffee, really a lot of these newer foods to European or English palates. There's a story that coffee, being new to the English-speaking folks, they treated it first like tea. They got it green, it wasn't roasted yet, and they simply steeped it. And they found the effects less than stimulating. So, you know, there was a real learning curve. Coffee actually predates tea in the British Empire. The first tea houses were actually in the early part of the 18th century, whereas coffee houses first established in London in 1650. Tea became a huge commodity because of the connection to Parliament, and the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson at the time, was actually a tea seller in Boston. A bit of a conflict of interest during the destruction of the tea, if you ask me, and one of the reasons why the tea went into the harbor in the first place in Boston. The royal governor was in the pocket of this business. And I find that very interesting because you can see there how colonialism kind of didn't work. Colonialism is only about one thing, and it's about the mother country. And everything outward from there is supplying that. And so that mentality was being held by members of Parliament, not specifically King George. Honestly, I've done a lot of studying. He's not that bad of a guy when you get right down to it. He was trying to be a decent monarch. And it was really Parliament and in the pocket of big organizations who were shipping tea and other commodities around the world. So these grievances that we had in the Declaration, one specifically that says that the king was sending people here to eat out their substance, take all the food. that was one of the problems. And we see that very specifically when the town of Boston is being held captive. And the British are destroying churches and desecrating them with their livestock and horses, chickens running wild, and the most painful grievance at one point is that they staged a play in one of the churches, which theater was banned in Boston and in most of Massachusetts until the late 18th century after the Revolution. But you know, this dichotomy of these British soldiers and these intrepid New Englanders, this is the reasons why we have the Revolution. The very first acts that are passed, the intolerable acts, these tariffs, legislative tariffs, were on food commodities, sugar and tea. And we see this in the writings of people like John Adams and other members of the Continental Congress. They are concerned that we are just going to be a vessel to supply London and England with food, lumber, and those kind of things. And these were very specifically written down in the Declaration so that we could proclaim it to the world. So my thesis is that the American Revolution was fought primarily for a lot of political reasons, but it was about food commodities. At the time, we actually knew that Philadelphia flour made bigger and more flavorsome loaves. Flour from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania was highly prized. We can see this from the newspapers. So the American Revolution, although being fought for political reasons and, you know, being documented and written down by lawyers from this side and lawyers from this side, I tend to focus on what the common people were doing, the soldiers, the people who were eating every day. Because that's the one thing that ties all this together. You have to eat every day. And I think that that is, that's really where a lot of my study comes from. I've got some books outside that I'm happy to share, but there are a number of texts that I use from this time period. One of them is the very first cookbook written in America. And has anybody seen this little tome before? It's called American Cookery. It's the very first cookbook written in America by an American. And very interestingly, the front page, written by Amelia Simmons, an American orphan. Now, that was on purpose. Saying that she was an orphan was connecting it to us as a nation and what we were now trying to do. We were trying to forge our own history, our own identity. And in this little book, you can see recipes that for the very first time are using American ingredients like molasses and squash and pumpkins. And we're starting to see the development of an American cuisine. And some scholars believe that this was written specifically to identify an American cuisine. That, like, this is American food, hands off everyone else. But if you actually read the book, they're all English and half of them are French. And it's because, you know, the French make really good food and the English pretend like they don't just make English French dishes. I mean, that's pretty much how the exchange has gone. So if you go through this book, you will see some American ingredients, but they're in French and English traditional dishes. A lot of boiled puddings. I passed out a flyer that has my recipe for hasty pudding. Another name for hasty pudding is polenta. And I don't know if there's any Italians here who know polenta, but you know, polenta before corn was made of flour and barley and different things. Polenta became the polenta it is today because of American hasty pudding. So this book here is really the book that I use the most when constructing my recipes. And what I do on the channel is I don't just give you this recipe, I translate it into modern parlance. I try to give you modern equivalents. And it's hard because they don't give you that in here. They give you a general idea of what the recipe is, and they gave you a lot of credit for knowing how to cook already. So we had to forge our own identity through the American Revolution and in our eating. So if I can recommend any cookbook from this time period, I would definitely do this. Yes.
Question over here.
Yes, question.